Hey, closet busters and bold move makers. It is time once again for Life Uncloseted. So I want you to gather around because it is time once again to kick down those closet doors of your life. We're here to escape our BS, explore our fears, and elevate our self-expression. I'm your host, Rick Clemens. I'm the bold move expert and that coming out guy who's going to take you to the party, the pulpit, the wake, and back to the party of living your life uncloseted. So come on along with me and grab hold of yourself and get ready to step out, step up, and step into facing your fears, making your bold moves, and living life without apologies. Now let's get to the show. Hey, Life Uncloseted family. It's time once again to break free of your fears, to make your bold moves, and live your life without apologies. I'm your host, Rick Clemens, and happy Pride. We are in the midst of Happy Pride Month, and we're just a few days away from, drumroll please, Father's Day. I hope my girls are listening. I gave you a list. I sent them to you. You better be checking them twice. And of course, I'm just yanking their chains. But as long as we're in the midst of celebrating Pride, why don't we also celebrate prides of being parents, and especially gay dads and moms? I hope you're listening too, because we're going to celebrate you. Last month was your month. This month is ours. But I thought, what better way to celebrate Pride and Father's Day than to have another gay dad on the show? But this time I went searching, and a friend of mine who you have heard on the show before, Mike Ganino, he recommended our guest today, and he's a father. He's not just a single father. He and his husband are parents, and they have quite a journey they went through. And I thought, what a beautiful way to celebrate Pride. So we're going to bring my new friend, Dillon Rasmussen, onto the podcast. So welcome, Dillon. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me. Happy Father's Day.
Hey, same to you, man. Happy Pride as well. So let's dive right in. You guys just did some magical wonders. You kind of did your thing, had a little fun in bed, and then boom, one of you was pregnant and had kids. Okay, that's the end of the podcast. That's
right. Yeah.
Okay, no, that is not how this happened at all. And I'm so glad you're here to kind of talk about this, because I think we're still in a space in our world, especially in our country, where oh boy, sometimes it's wonderful to be gay, and sometimes you just go, are we going to go through all this crap all over again, especially when it comes to being gay parents? So let's start for you. Did you always want to be a dad?
I did, actually. Even when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a dad.
A bad dad? Okay,
a bad dad, yeah.
That's a whole other show right there.
Right. We'll save that for next year. No, I always wanted to be a dad. My parents actually got divorced when I was 2, and my mom asked my dad to raise me because she wasn't in a good place in terms of her mental health and knew that she couldn't take care of me the way that she needed to. And so my dad eagerly took on the responsibility, and it was just the two of us, pretty much all growing up. I mean, I saw my mom quite frequently, and I think that relationship with my dad, I just really valued. We were incredibly close. We're still incredibly close, and so I always wanted to have that experience with another, with kids of my own. And I'll tell you that one of the things that I struggled most with in coming into my own identity was this possible idea that I would not be a dad. I would not have kids of my own.
Isn't that interesting? Because I think so many of us in the LGBTQ world, a lot of us struggle with that. And it's so, at the time, I'm 55 years old. I'm soon going to be 56. And I do remember that was one of my first thoughts, okay, if I'm gay, there's no way I'll ever never have kids. I wasn't wanting them per se, but the thought was there of, okay, if I ever did want them. And it was such a scary thing to think, okay, this isn't part of the equation, which was really so wrong. But
right. It's like a door is automatically closed to you from the very beginning if you accept basically who you are. And then it's also, I remember thinking why should I be punished in a way for just being myself, And so, yes, I always wanted to be a father, as I got older and, kind of came to the realization that I probably wouldn't be, it was still something that always kind of stuck in the back of my mind. And I met my, partner of 22 years and, now husband Tom, and, we had talked about it. He was from a similar mindset of also wanting kids. And so we researched adoption and realized that that's that wasn't as viable to gay men as, let's say, a lesbian couple or certainly a heterosexual couple, especially 10 years ago. You know, it might be a little bit different now, but we had heard stories of friends who, you know, were on waiting lists for 5-7 years. Finally, somebody would say, yes, I want you to be the parents to my, you know, child. And then at the last minute, it would change. You know, there was also kind of a social climate of, hey, what devious thing is going to happen by these guys adopting babies? You know, so really
it's so interesting because it's why just the men? And I mean, we both know it's like, you know, gay men, we're the perverts. We have sex everywhere. You know, we'll walk out the door, see a handsome guy and like, okay, let's screw, you know?
Let's end up in a bush somewhere.
Yeah. But it is an interesting dilemma. And I know for me, because I was biological father, I didn't have to face that. But what you're sharing right now, I've heard it over and over and over again. So that definitely wasn't working for you guys. So
no, you know, and we also looked at international adoption, and that's a giant headache too. There's some countries that have some pretty strict rules about what they call single men are not allowed to adopt. Single women can. So, you know, China is a country that will not let men adopt. At the time, you know, Russia closed all of their adoption avenues. And so really, like, Guatemala was the only place viable. But, you know, there was all this research that came out that those babies were basically being stolen from these poor mothers in the countryside and then sold to U.S. families for an extreme markup. And so, you know, after exploring all of this, we decided, hey, you know, maybe surrogacy is the way we want to go. Maybe we should do it that way, where we control more of the factors in terms of, you know, having a kid. And, you know, selfishly, there's also the biological connection that that you might want with a child, or, you know, desire with having kids of your own. And you know, but we were still thinking in the mindset that, like, which one of our friends would ever agree to be a surrogate? And that's a huge responsibility to ask someone. And so at that point, we're like, you know, maybe it isn't a viable option, just because, you know, we don't know that we would ever want to put that on somebody. And then certainly the person you'd probably ask would be a close friend. And then does that make the friendship weird from that point on? And so we had kind of given up on it. And Tom had a colleague at his work that kind of heard his story and, you know, our research, and shared with him that him and his wife had trouble conceiving. The wife wasn't able to carry a child, and he had used a consultant out of Chicago that he said made everything wonderful and easy, and she did all of the hard work to find, you know, help find the surrogate and the lawyer and help with the legal stuff and setting up the payments, and they had a successful transfer, and, you know, we're expecting a baby in a couple of months. And so we made an appointment with her and met with her over coffee, and she was phenomenal, and we loved it. We were really excited by it. But we found out that there is a huge price tag attached with going that route. And it's not something that you can save up. It's not like, oh, well, let's start the process and then we can save money for later on down the road.
Yeah, and there's no payment plan either. So
no payment plan.
There's no layaway plan, ironically, and no pun intended.
Yeah. Oh, and so we realized that, hey, you know what? Financially, we're not in a position to do this yet. So again, that put us on hold for a little while. And then Tom and I relocated from Chicago to Indianapolis because he got a job as the CFO of Angie's List. And so at that time, we sold our place in Chicago, and we were one of the few lucky people in that market that was actually able to make some money off the sale of our house. And so we used those extra funds to finally say, like, hey, now we have some extra income to start the process. And so we called her up again. Her name's Mindy Berkson with New Advantage Surrogacy. And, you know, we said, let's do this. And she was super excited, and she's phenomenal. She actually specializes in same-sex couples. and surrogacy. So that helped too. We didn't have to go through any awkward conversations or, kind of justify, what we were doing. She also had a series of resources that she knew were very open and friendly to working with same-sex couples, which was great. Because you certainly don't want to sit down with a surrogate and then have her say, what, you're gay? Like that's not what I was on board with. And so we started the process with her. One of the big things that we wanted when we were looking for the surrogate was to find one in the state of Illinois, or a state like Illinois, that would allow both of us to be on the birth certificate when the baby was born. A lot of states out there will not let same-sex couples both parents be on the birth certificate. It has to be one, and then the other one has to the other one has to adopt, which requires a home visit, court supervised counseling, and then an official adoption, which neither one of us wanted. We also thought that would create kind of an awkward, like, well, who gets to be the legal father and who has to be the adoptive father?
It's interesting here as you're talking, because I want to just make sure, and I know my audience fairly well, but I think because of this story, if you all just step back for a moment here and think about everything that Dillon has said so far, and if you happen to be heterosexual, and if you happen to be a biological parent, I want you to look at the checklist and go, no, I didn't have to do any of this. I didn't have to do 90% of what he's already shared, we're not even to the rest of the story yet. There's no having to check to see if the name's going to be on the birth certificate. There's none of this having to pay all this money. There's none of these home visit stuff. So I love that you're sharing this detail, Dillon, because we've had other people come on and talk about this in different ways. But I love that for Pride Month and for Father's Day, we are showing this is what it means when a gay, lesbian, bi, trans couple, well, not so much the bi, but there may be some interesting twists there too. It shows how much these parents want to be parents.
Oh, absolutely. And as we went through this process, just to kind of champion what you said, and we kept coming up against these, not roadblocks, but certainly obstacles or different ways that we had to do things versus the way, a regular family would do in terms of surrogacy. It just reminded us more and more like how important this was to us. And then certainly, made that reward once we did have the kids that much more joyful because we had gone through the experience to a greater degree than let's say, and that's not to minimize a different couple's experience, but as you alluded to, it's certainly a different type of challenge for a same-sex couple, especially males, right? Because with female couples, one could carry the child, which makes things a lot easier and a lot cheaper too. One thing, not to get sidetracked, but insurance companies won't pay for any IVF for men. They will pay for women. Single women, married women, lesbian women, it all goes on the insurance. Everything out of pocket. So from the start till when the babies were born, all came out of our personal, expenses. And then luckily, once they were born, it goes on the insurance. That was pretty easy. But
I remember once George and I, my husband and I, were in Provincetown. It's been 7-8 years ago, but and actually we were there for family week with our kids, and we went in, we actually ended up buying a piece of art from this particular artist. And he talked about how he had been trying to become a father, and you could just tell by the way he talked, and he choked up a few times, and he goes, family week is always really hard for me because I want to be a father, but because I'm a single gay man, I mean, there's just the loops and the jumps and the hoops and everything that I'm going through. And he goes, I've been trying for 5 years and I still can't get it done. And he said, yeah, if I had hundreds of thousands of dollars, I could basically buy a kid. And that's how he said it. He goes, but I don't want to buy parenthood. He goes, I'm not going to have to pay, but he goes, it's ridiculous what I'm going through. And again, I think it's a testament to, especially gay men, how much gay men who do not have the advantage of having the biological child, quote unquote, so to speak, because once you do surrogacy, yes, there's biological stuff that happens, but So you guys started moving towards this, and go
Yeah,
on
and
with your story.
so we then found a surrogate in Rockford, Illinois, which is a small industrial, or what used to be an industrial. All the industries kind of left now.
Mm-hmm.
City outside of Chicago. She had 2 kids of her own. One of the requirements to be a legal surrogate is that you've had kids previously,
Mm-hmm.
so that you don't have any, emotional
Right.
attachment, or less of an emotional attachment during the pregnancy. She was about to marry her fiance, who was her high school sweetheart and also the father of the 2 kids. We were a little worried meeting him, I got to be honest. He came from a small town, religious background, military background, worked the 3rd shift at an electrical plant. So all of the, kind of whistles and warning bells of someone that might be ultra conservative. And he turned out to be phenomenal. It takes a pretty open mind to have your fiance carry a child for 2 gay men that live in another state. So there are some great people out there in the world, and that's one thing that this journey has taught us. That during the pregnancy, I thought more and more of how selfless it was for someone to say, yes, I will do this for you, and with the potential that I will never be in contact with you or this gift that I gave you ever again, and that's huge to wrap your mind around.
Well, it is huge. And I was on the board of directors for a teen home where we last lived. And one of the gals that worked there, she loved being a surrogate. And I remember talking to her about it, and I said, how do you do it? I said, I'm not like, tell me how to do this, it was more, but how do you in your own mind do this where you do that? She goes, for me, it's all about the joy of giving somebody else the joy of parenthood. And I thought that's really beautiful, because I know for me, I think I would have a harder time detaching, so to speak. I don't know.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I might not. I might, if the kid's really colicky, I'm like, yeah, go, take it away. It's yours. But,
yeah.
It's interesting and I've talked to several surrogates, and each one has their own interesting perspective,
Yeah, so our surrogate, her aunt had done it, not for a gay couple, but for a couple.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where she had first kind of opened her mind to it. One thing that helped in our situation was, you use, or in legal surrogacy, you use a separate egg donor.
Mm-hmm.
So really, the surrogate just becomes a carrier, quote.
Right. Yeah,
they even call them, they've changed the name from surrogate to gestational carrier, which to me sounds so awful and impersonal.
Very clinical.
Yeah.
Like, here's the tube. This is what you carry.
Right.
Bye-bye.
There's no emotion there. And so that helped. But I know from talking to her after the kids were born that she went through a significant, not depression in that like she couldn't get out of bed every day, but she just had like kind of this absence in her life that she said, was really hard for her to get over, and not want to, call me every day and want to ask questions or, FaceTime.
Well, and I think I would guess, and I've heard this different versions from people on the other side of the coin who are the parents, and they're like, yeah, there are moments that like we feel like maybe we should call, and then there's moments like, no, we know we need to step away, and especially when you might have created a good relationship, and so it is all over the board. And of course, as we're speaking about this, we're giving fuel to the fire to people who are like, this is why this shouldn't happen. No, we're just realistic about this, folks.
Right.
We're saying we're real about this. We know this is part of what can happen. But it's also, when you step back, it's about bringing beautiful life into the world to people who really want to have a beautiful life in their world that they're unable to do themselves.
Right. And I think like you said, it varies to degrees in terms of interaction with surrogates.
Mm-hmm.
We heard stories of people that like, hey, let's do the, transfer. I'll talk to you again when you have the baby, and then we're done. And then people that, the surrogate is part of their lives and comes to family functions, and, the kids call them and so forth. And then, we kind of went more the middle of the road. We texted a lot during the pregnancy. We went to the doctor's appointments, ultrasound, so forth. After birth, though, like, I've stayed in contact with her. I send her pictures every once in a while just so they can see what they look like. I'll, send her Christmas cards, text her on her birthday, that type of thing. But, I think from that point is where our relationship will stay, or, will end. And not to be mean to her or say like, hey, we're not grateful for what you did, but more just for less confusion for our boys when they grow up. It's already going to be a tough story to tell,
right?
And so don't want to add any weird feelings around it. We'll be open and honest about it, but don't necessarily think we'll continue on with an in-depth relationship. We're not as great as when we were doing the pregnancy.
So here's something that I'm curious, and of course, we're recording this. The audience can't talk back to us, but I don't know how many people have already caught on. There's two. It wasn't just, okay, we had a baby. We had babies. So I know that was, well, first of all, you both did or did not donate your sperm?
So we both donated. We don't know who they ultimately used.
Yep.
And, the theory behind this, and I don't think we would necessarily talk about it even if we did, but we didn't want one parent to be the legitimate father again and the other one not. And not so much for us, but more so for the boys. We would never want them to feel like one dad was less than the other. Or, when you're going through teenage years, you would never want your kid to say, well, you're not my real father. And so at this point, we felt like it was just would be a healthier family dynamic if that wasn't even relevant, because it's not, quite frankly. And we will live life as a family unit where we're both the dads. We're both on the birth certificate. We're one happy family, knock on wood for the next 20, 30 years. And I say that because I too am in my mid 40s here. So when you do the math, pushing up against the clock here, in terms of span of life. But so we did both donate, and they took basically the healthiest, strongest embryo. We only transferred one, because we actually didn't want to worry about transferring multiples, and if there ever came a decision to have to reduce for this sake of one or two. So we just transferred one. Our surrogate went to confirm whether or not she was pregnant. This was our very first transfer too, so we were lucky enough for it to take the first time. That is actually pretty rare. Most couples, it takes 2 or 3 times, which adds that many more dollars to the experience, especially if you're not getting any help from your insurance company. And so she went in and they said, hey, not only are you pregnant, but your HCG levels are quite high. And so I was on the phone and I said, well, what does that mean? And they said, well, it's either a really healthy pregnancy or we're dealing with twins here. And so we were like, wow, I don't know if we're ready for that. I think we always wanted 2 kids, but like more of a staggered. So, a couple weeks later, she goes in for her ultrasound, and I'm trying to FaceTime her, but the reception in the building is horrible. So the call keeps dropping. She has to start with the doctor because the doctor's like, hey, I'm not waiting around for you to get your FaceTime working. Like, I have other people to. So anyway, the FaceTime clicks back in as they're already started. And he said, oh, welcome. We're about to listen to the heartbeat. And I was like, wow, this is phenomenal. And so he says, well, here's baby A's heartbeat. And I was like, baby A? Does that mean there's a, and then sure enough, and here's baby B's heartbeat. And I was so excited and overwhelmed that I hung up on the surrogate. I called Tom at work. I got him out of a board meeting, told him we were having twins. We celebrated and did the moment together. And then I realized I'd hung up on the surrogate. And so I quickly called her back and apologized. And luckily she thought the call had just dropped again, and not that I was some giant a-hole. And then, we continued on with listening to heartbeats. And, from that point on, Tom and I had to readjust, where this path was going to take us.
Absolutely.
And after the initial kind of shock, we were very excited. Wanted to tell everyone who would listen, but had to wait that 12-week period to make sure that it was, of course,
real.
Good. Yeah.
Make it.
And so that was probably the hardest 12 weeks of our lives. But then
and the thing is you guys did have, you did have some cards stacked against you. In, any pregnancy, there's cards, like, okay, let's wait the 12 weeks. But because you're doing surrogacy and because of, the egg and the transfers and all this sort of stuff, there's any number of things that can typically go wrong in this, as you already indicated. Sometimes it could take 2 or 3, takes before it really happens. So for anyone who's been through that, and, God bless you if you had a miscarriage and lost it, I know you can relate to what we're discussing here. And I think it's just heightened by, again, the commitment to go, okay, we're going to go through this in the only way we know possible, and we're really going to give everything we can to make this work. But this is where we as men kind of like, okay, well, this is all we can do,
Right. It's out of my hands.
It's out of our hands. We kind of did all we could do at this stage. So
yeah. Well, and we had when we were able to do the first kind of imaging ultrasound that wasn't just listening,
right.
We also discovered another kind of challenge that we had to deal with that really scared both of us. But we found out that the twins were monochorionic, which meant they were sharing the same placenta. And of course, the worry with sharing the same placenta is that they'll fight for a food source. And what typically happens is not one twin is more aggressive, but one twin actually gives away their food to make sure that the other one survives. And so here we are having this happy moment. We've embraced that we're having twins. And then we get the news that, hey, we got to be open to the fact that we might not end up with twins. We might just have one. And we're going to have to make sure that we keep track of their development. Now, the good news was about week, I don't know, maybe 16, 18, when they had gotten big enough, we then were able to see in the ultrasound that there was a thin wall or barrier between the two, which makes them monochorionic diamniotic. So they were getting their own independent food source because that wall was there. So then it became less of a concern. But, to go back to your point, it was like, hey, here's this joyous moment. Hey, looks like everything's going great. We can't wait to get to the 12-week mark and talk about this. And then here's another challenge for you, based on what's genetically going on inside the womb. But luckily, like I said, they were able to go almost full term. They were delivered 6 weeks early. One was right at 4 pounds, and the other one was 3 pounds and 12 ounces, which is a tiny, tiny, tiny child.
Yep.
I remember showing up in the NICU, and just, you could hold them in one hand, and they looked so fragile, and they were still hooked up to a bazillion machines, and one was on a ventilator for the first couple hours that he was born. Luckily, by later in the night, they were able to take him off of it. But yeah, they were just these small, super delicate creatures, that we had to take care of. And it was probably 24 hours before we got to hold them without them connected to any machines, which was still faster than most kids in that situation. So we were grateful for that. But that was also tough to have this beautiful day, and all of this excitement and joy, and then see them, so fragile in terms of their life. And, you know, we were living in Indianapolis and we're in Rockford for the, you know, that's where she had the delivery, because that's where she lived. And, you know, they ended up spending 3.5 weeks in the NIC ward, and we lived in the hospital for 3.5 weeks, which, you know, although being in great proximity to them, you know, was really depressing and really took its toll after a couple of weeks. It's hard to be, you know, an energetic, positive dad when, you know, you're living in a hospital room and eating hospital food. You know, but we were up there every morning for their first feeding, and then we would sit with them for a while, and then we would go downstairs and have breakfast and go back up for the next feeding, and then go to the YMCA so that we could get some stress relief and some fitness, and then back there for the next feeding, and then we'd leave for lunch, and then we'd spend all afternoon holding them while they slept, or doing the skin to skin, where you know, they lay on their chest or your chest, and, you know, then we'd do another feeding and go to dinner, and then come back and do a bath and a feeding and sit in the room until about 11 o'clock, midnight. And then we would go downstairs and go to sleep and wake up and do it all over again. And, you know, did that for 3.5 weeks. And, you know, I going back to your earlier point about the lengths, you know, that not only we went to, but a lot of gay couples go to just to have kids. You know, we ended up becoming friends with most of the nurses in the unit, you know, and they said repeatedly, they're like, we have other families that have kids, not twins necessarily, but have kids in your situation, and they come for the 2 or 3 hours in the afternoon. They might come for an hour in the morning, and then you don't see them because they're just kind of killing time until they're able to go home. And she's like, you guys are here every day, you know, almost 18 hours a day. You know, at one point they were like, take the night off, go see a movie, go to dinner. Don't, you know, you don't have to come upstairs every minute of the day. But, you know, again, we had been on such a journey to get there. It was like, now that we're here, you know, we want to enjoy every minute we could. And we also wanted them to know as much as they could that, hey, we're here for you. We're here for you from the beginning. We're your dads. We love you dearly. And we're going to do whatever challenge that we have to do to take care of you, you know, because that's the responsibility we signed on for. That's what we wanted.
Yeah, you know, and I know most people get it as parents, but I want to kind of go back to something you just said about the importance of being there and taking care of yourself. It's a fine balance because earlier in the spring, my daughter was going through a lot of stuff, and we were in and out of ERs, and I think the grand total of ER visits was somewhere around 18 to 20 times. And it was, you know, we kind of went in for the same thing each time, but, you know, you got to be there, you know, and it is taxing. It's taxing on them. It's taxing on you. I remember at one point my daughter actually saying, I'm just wasting everybody's time. And I'm like, no, you're not. We've got to do this, you know. And, you know, as a person who runs his own business, I'm grateful, obviously, to be able to like, okay, well, I'm dropping everything. And there were times I was sitting in there writing blog posts in the ER. And one of the nurses said to me, wow, you come prepared. I'm like, well, when you've been here as many times,
Unfortunately,
it's kind of like you have the bag packed, and
you
kind of got to know a few of them. You know, they all know that I have a podcast or 2 podcasts. And so it is that space of, do you take care of yourself or do you take care of your kid? And it is a balance. It's truly a balance of both, because you can't be there for them if you're not taking care of yourself. But I can't imagine not being there, even in the worst case scenarios. Yes, if I didn't live as close as I did, that would be tough, but I would do whatever it took to be there, because that bond is so important, especially at the age that your boys are, to create that bond, especially in a non-traditional parenting environment, to everything you can do to just continue to show in little ways what that love looks like. So
absolutely. You know, I always joke around that prior to them being born, I would have told you that I had kids for selfish reasons. And, you know, the one thing that fatherhood and parenthood teaches you, and from day one, is that it's not selfish. You become so selfless because you want to give everything you have to make sure that this child, you know, has all the love and support and feels comfort and feels safe, and and so that was both a wonderful thing for me to realize and a really tough thing for me to realize. When we did finally leave the hospital, they were still significantly underweight, and so we had to be on a pretty rigid feeding cycle,
of course,
which was every 3 hours. And just to give you some perspective too, for a baby that size to drink 2 ounces of milk takes about 45 minutes to an hour. So not only are we feeding them every 3 hours, but the whole process takes about an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes by the time you thaw the breast milk and so forth, because our surrogate donated breast milk for us. We're talking too, like 9 o'clock at night, midnight, 3 a.m, 6 a.m. Tom had to go back to work at that point because he had used all his paternity time when we were in the hospital. And so I slept in the boys' room, but I would get up at midnight. I would get up at 3 a.m. I would get up at 6 a.m. I would feed them. And then by the time I'm all done, especially in the overnight shifts, I'm looking at 40 minutes to be able to get any sleep before I have to wake up and do it all over again. Yeah. And so going back to your point, like, it's just, it was exhausting. There were times where I was like, I don't think I could. I mean, that's a level of exhaustion that I didn't even know existed. And there could have been nights too, because they weren't waking me up. It's not like they were crying and saying it's time to eat. It was my alarm going off telling me, hey, you got to feed the kids. But I knew how important it was. And so I got up, I did it. Luckily on the weekends, Tom would do 9 o'clock and midnight. So I could get at least, 3 or 4 hours of sleep on those days to kind of help. But you just do it. And, as you start to do it more and more, you realize how important it is. And like you said, you've been to the ER 18, 20 times, and there wouldn't be a time where you would ever say, nope, not this time. That's one of the awesome and amazing parts of being a parent, is it's no longer about you. It's about, I think it gets back to you as they get older. And
it does. And it's always an ebb and a flow, and my kids are now 20 and soon actually in 24 at this point. And the ebb and the flow is actually a frustrating thing, and it's a beautiful thing simultaneously. It's like, okay, we're good. And then, okay, now we're not going to be good, but you learn so much about yourself. You learn so much about your relationship with your spouse.
Absolutely.
You learn so much about the kids, of course. But the thing I feel like I've learned the most through this entire journey of, having been married in a heterosexual relationship, then coming out and sharing parenting, and then having my husband involved for many, many years, where it was just the three of us parents. And now my ex-wife is remarried, and it's kind of all the kids are grown. So he's kind of just like the husband, but whatever, no disrespect. It's just, there's not the bond, it's like, okay, we're too far in our lives to say, oh, this is my stepdad, even though sometimes they do refer to that. Sometimes it's just my mom's husband. But you learn so much about what you're capable of.
Yeah.
And also what you're not.
Yeah.
And the times when you're like, I'm not capable of this, it's actually a beautiful lesson, because you kind of have to learn to stand back and go, okay, if I'm not capable of this, then this is where I need support. This is where I need help. And I need to set my own pride aside and go, okay, yep, I need help here. I remember one night when our oldest daughter was pretty young. She was probably 8 or 9 months old, and she wasn't colicky, but she would get in these spaces where she'd just cry and cry and cry and cry and cry. And, I was working at that time. My wife, or ex-wife at that time, or my ex-wife, was still on maternity leave. And yes, that's when they still called it maternity leave. And I stood in my daughter's room and I thought, I can't do anything about this. And I even looked at her, and she was like just staring up at me crying. And I'm like looking at her going, I can't do anything about this. I don't know what you want Dad to do. And I don't know how many times I'm going to have to tell you, I can't do anything about this. And then when she was 14, I actually had to say the same words to her. I can't do anything about this. And it's so interesting to watch how the same exact words take on a whole new meaning as you go in the ebb and the flow.
Right.
Because that later in life thing was, I can't do anything about this other than just be here for you. I realized when I said those words to her, it actually was a flashback to when I stood in her room and said those same words. And at that point in time, I couldn't, because I didn't know what she needed. Now, when I was saying it, it was like, I can't do anything about this other than truly be here for you.
Right.
You're going to have to walk through this. You're going to have to do. And so it is very interesting to watch this happen. And so the boys are now how old?
Well, they just turned 2.
Okay.
So we're knee deep in the trials and tribulations of a 2-year-old boy times 2.
Yeah.
So we have one that's a screamer, and he doesn't just scream. He like holds the note for a good 15, 20 seconds. It's kind of something out of an 80s slasher film. And then we have the other one that just spontaneously starts sobbing, and it's not just crying. It's like the heavy breathing where I almost can't breathe. And usually it's simultaneously. So So yeah, there's some really challenging moments now that that make you scratch your head and say, wow, and then in talking to other parents, I guess age 3 now is worse than age 2. They call it a 3-nager. So it's a really independent kid who needs to be validated, but has an attitude problem with you all the time. So
all the time,
so I guess what I thought would be a respite after 2, I have a whole another phase to look forward to.
Oh, you have a whole lot of other phases to look forward to. So.
Yeah.
Which I know people, it always used to irritate me when people would say stuff like that to me. And I hate it when I say it, but I always like to say, you've got so many cool new adventures coming your way.
Right. That's a much better way to say it than the
and
other
they
way.
are cool because it teaches you about yourself. I mean, if I could replay so many moments now where I am at, and even in most currently, because they still need you. I mean, it's so interesting how the needs change, but they are cool adventures. And
well, and I love that you said that, because in sharing stories after the kids were born with people that don't have kids, and a lot of my friends, I was trying to get that exact point across, that, there were so many days where, like, being a dad, like, the kids exposed all of my weaknesses, and just thinking at the end of the day, like, hey, I really need to evaluate, like, what I used to think was important, or how I handle a situation, or, and then the level of exhaustion with it was like, well, how am I ever supposed to do better when I'm so tired? And but you're right, like, beautiful moments come out of that. Like, it taught me a lot about myself and what I needed to do differently, and I think we all want to take the great things that our parents instilled in us and change the things that maybe didn't work well with our parents. And, so I agree with you, and I think that's so important for other people to realize when you're a parent, that there are going to be nights where you go to bed feeling like, I'm probably the worst parent in the world, and you're not, of course. Like, nothing catastrophic has happened, but it's just such an emotional journey, and so, like, forgiveness is such a big piece of that, because I know that I have a lifetime of mistakes that are probably going to happen as a parent. I just hope they're, not detrimental to the kids' overall development or happiness,
Dillon,
or,
quite honestly, Dillon, if you don't, we're all going to call you bitch. So it's going to be like, fuck you, bitch. You what you're doing, but
well deserved. Yes.
Yeah,
well deserved.
Exactly. But and so it's such a great conversation to have during the middle of Pride Month. And I'm sitting here watching the clock, going, okay, I'm going to let us keep talking, because he's done an amazing job of he's either got those boys completely sedated right now, or they knew, okay, dad's got something to do, and we're going to let dad do it. But so I'm so glad you took the time out to, like, share your story, number one, and be a mirror to people who are like, okay, we're going to go do this. And yes, it's scary. And yes, it's a challenge, and all of this layered on top of the fact of being single gay men, so to speak, or married couple, and going forward with this. You can do what you want to do. You just got to truly commit to it. And it is a commitment being a parent, no matter what your sexuality, gender orientation, any of that. But I think there is a special space for the LGBTQ community who choose to be parents and who really not only choose, but fight to be parents, and especially in today's world. So,
well, and just to add to that, I think it's also important too, as I've been a dad now, and I'm out in public with 2 kids and my husband, and we just went on a vacation. The one thing that I really value in our family unit, beyond our family unit, is to see the kids of other families and the teenagers of other families see us, react to us. And I think that is so important too, because I can tell you, growing up, I didn't have any, exposure to any of those positive gay examples and role models. And so, I'll deal with the mom giving me the dirty look, on the airplane, because I know that her kid sitting next to her is seeing something that will open his mind, regardless of whether or not he's gay, but will open his mind to just a better environment to live in, And so I think that that's an indirect positive also too, of us being a family and being out in public, is just to give those kids out there, or like you said, other adults out there, just the confidence to know, hey, I can do this if I want to, and if I don't, look at that, look at how great that is to see. So, and
it always is a reflection of, what is possible to the world. To wrap this up, it's kind of I remember the first time that we experienced, I wouldn't say discrimination, but definitely, bristled some people's fur on the back of their neck. And our daughters were probably 9 and 5, maybe somewhere in there. They're about 4 years apart. So, and I remember not even thinking twice about it, but then checking into a hotel with girls that age and 2 men.
Oh yeah.
And it had never crossed my mind. That had, because we're a family. This is what we do. We get a room with 2 beds.
Right.
The dads sleep together, the girls sleep together, and it's like, wow. And so it's interesting. But then as I got older, it got even more interesting at times, because even up until there, even in the last probably 3-4 years, there's been a couple of times that we've all actually, last summer, we all stayed in the same hotel room for a conference, and luckily we didn't have any issues there. But it's something that I'm now very cognizant of, especially I think it'll happen for you guys too in your own way, because there's something about men with, young women that definitely like, ooh, there we go. But then it can go the other way too. So like I said, you're in for a lifetime of it, my friend.
Of cool adventures, I think is the phrase you used.
I think that's what we're going to call it. Lifetime of cool adventures. And as long as each time something really happens, you can go, okay, but Rick said this is just a lifetime of cool adventures. So
I'll hear your voice in my head.
Exactly. Well, again, thanks, man. And thank you boys for being quiet, staying asleep, not that we cared. But it's awesome, man. And thanks for sharing Father's Day and Pride with us.
Well, thanks for having me. And again, happy Father's Day to you.
Same to you, my friend. Thanks so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Hey, Life Uncloseted family. Another episode of Life Uncloseted has come to an end, and it is time for all of us to sashay away and go face our fears, make those bold moves, and stand up to living our life without apology. But before you do, I've got a favor to ask of you. Would you hop over to iTunes or Spotify or Podbean or wherever it is that you're listening to this, and just give us a little bit of love if you like what we're doing here at Life Uncloseted. Here's what it does. It helps other people find the show. It helps other people get to know what we're all about. And you just might help change a life. In fact, if you really want to change a life, we'd love it if you just ask a friend to take a listen and see what they think. So that's it. Love you all deeply. I'm Rick Clemens, the host of Life Uncloseted. And never stop stepping out, stepping up, and stepping into living your life uncloseted.